Hello, welcome everyone to another episode of the Virtual Ninja Training. Today it's all about attack simulation training. Before we get there, a reminder, it's October, the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So there's a lot of people putting resources together for you, so you stay safe and secure wherever you are. So with that, I have a new expert with me on the show today. I have Brendan. He was not part of the previous season. Brendan, I'm excited. Thank you so much for joining, and please introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks for having us, Heike. We're very excited to be here. My name is Brandon Koeller, and I'm the product manager for attack simulation training. And I'm excited to tell you guys all about the product today.
Yes, I hope you are still excited after, because I have so many questions. I need to admit, I'm super new to this, so I'm super excited, and I hope I'm not asking too stupid questions. So bear with me. Before we go into all the details, what is it? Like, what is attack simulation training?
Yeah, it's the best question. First, and really the first question. So attack simulation training is it's a tool that's baked into Microsoft Defender for Office 365 that allows you to assess your end user's phish susceptibility and train them on what the correct behavior is, and whether that's don't click on a phishing link or open a piece of malware, or teaching them how to do something positive like correctly reporting a phish email. But it's essentially about assessment and end user security awareness and training experiences, specifically around phish, although we do include a pretty big variety of training content in the tool today.
So you mentioned it's part of Defender for Office 365. Is this also how I can get access to it? Or is there different ways, different things that someone needs to, I don't know, download, click on?
Attack simulation training is part of the Defender for Office 365 P2 SKU offering and part of E5. Those things they sort of go hand in hand. And we have dedicated roles. So if you have a fairly complicated role-based access control system, you've got security admins and global admins and security readers and the like. Our product has standalone global admin roles for attack simulation training administrators and for payload harvesting authors. So if you care a lot about security and segmenting access for all this kind of stuff, you can have role-specific folks that work just on attack simulation training to access it without necessarily having access to everything else.
So, I'm in the security world for a while, and we usually develop tools that lock user down and block here and make the box secure and make that thingy secure. So now this is for me a totally new world, basically changing, or like not changing, but focusing on the behaviors of users. Is this a common thing? Is this something people still need to adopt, or how do you see this?
Yeah, a really, really good question. We see a lot of skepticism in security organizations, especially from CISOs, that this bucket of risk, we think about risk in three buckets. There's technology, there's process, and then there's people. Microsoft has a ton of really great solutions for the technology piece. A lot of our products are becoming much, much better and provide good, robust solutions to process risk. And this people piece is where attack simulation and training sort of comes in. The question we often get asked by CISOs is, rather than invest in this, what appears to be a fairly intractable problem with end users very consistently being pwnable by attackers, by sending them phish mails and stuff like that, why not just put all of your resources and energy into the protection layer? Just like make sure attackers can never get a phish message in front of an end user. Many decades of experience have taught us that attackers are entirely too creative They are excellent at leveraging kind of normal pathways of productivity and interaction between, normal users for that to be possible. I like to say that we'll achieve perfect protection somewhere around the heat death of the universe, right? We'll almost never get to perfect protection. And so it's really important that organizations recognize that and invest in the protection, the education, and the kind of behavior modification of their users, so they understand that those users have a role to play in the risk reduction strategy for the organization. Something like 85-90% of breaches include end user errors or behavior, like incorrect behavior. And so since it's basically the tip of the spear for any given breach, you really do have to have an education program that teaches them what can go wrong, and then experiences like simulations and other sorts of things that help them change their behavior and train it over time.
So, I mean, we both work at Microsoft, and there's a lot of different training methods that we have for ourselves, for our employees. This is one part of it, but of course, depending on the size of the organization, we have to watch extra recorded videos for us, go through a knowledge check, and really understand where the bad guys out there are trying to get us, right? So I think super important. So let's move a little bit to the operational side of the house. So that sounds like there's a tool that I need to set up and configure. How much of a work is it to get this thing going?
Oh, this is maybe of all the questions I get asked about tax simulation training, this is my favorite question because the answer is basically zero. There's zero configuration. It's the one thing about our tool that I'm especially proud of. Sending email can be incredibly complicated, especially from like a third-party tool. But because all of the Microsoft security services are essentially embedded in the Office 365 ecosystem, we basically understand how to deliver mail to all of your end users. And so you have an enormous amount of flexibility with configuring where emails are coming from. You can literally set any sender address that you want. The content of the email you can put anything you want in there. And it really is no configuration. We have a very high delivery rate. It's like 99.99% successful delivery. It's very fast. We do direct mailbox injection for all this stuff. And you can go from like just going to the tool in the Security and Compliance Center and setting up a simulation to your end users, like starting that training experience in literal minutes.
I think we will get there, hopefully. Yeah. I would love to see a demo. But like thinking about big companies, there's Microsoft, 200,000 employees, including vendors. Is there like a limit? Is it like, can you say I only can send a bunch of like to 5,000, or is this like, what's the scale here?
Yeah. Another advantage to operating in the context of the Office 365 ecosystem are basically our scale bar is equivalent to our largest customer. So obviously Microsoft is a customer. Most of the Fortune 500, in fact, most of the Fortune 10 are actually Office 365 customers. So our scale is essentially hundreds of thousands, millions. It is very, very high. We have not encountered a customer that has been unable to successfully deliver a simulation to their entire user base.
But would actually someone do this and send it? Like, I would assume you probably target specific users. Maybe, let's say you want to really make sure that I'm not throwing any group of people now under the bus, but let's say someone in sales and like a competitor, I don't know what, but like a very targeted like an email, a phishing email, and not a one to everyone.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. It sort of highlights what we see as a real shift in the purpose of this kind of a tool. So in general, organizations will do 2 simulations to every user inside the organization per year, right? About every 6 months, they'll do an all company simulation. More mature organizations will have carve outs for repeat offenders or people that are deemed as having high risk, and might do that more frequently, quarterly or maybe even monthly. We see that as essentially a fulfillment of a compliance requirement. So we like to think of it as like almost like checkbox training. You're really focused on the coverage and completeness of the engagement. You're focused on making sure that everyone sort of completes the training every given year, but you're not that worried, or at least you're not that engaged with the real purpose of this stuff, which is to change behavior, to actually measure and reduce the risk of your user base. Because all that stuff translates. Every time a user clicks and gives up a credential or installs malware, that translates into a breach. We can expose a lot of very high value assets inside your organizations, whether it's just specific infrastructure or data, or even just accounts with high privilege. I saw some data in a report a few weeks ago that the average breach costs an organization around $4 million. So if you can even avert a handful of breaches in a year, you could save quite a bit of money in doing that. So our tool, it fulfills all of those compliance and regulatory needs. Those are, every company needs to do them. You really do, like you and I as Microsoft employees have to do all this stuff. And so we want to help customers do that. But we also want to start to pivot the utility and purpose of end user engagement and awareness training to be more focused on risk reduction, on behavioral analytics and the discrete measurement and quantification of that behavioral risk to an organization, so that it shifts from being this compliance and sort of regulatory thing that you have to do twice a year to something that's just continually operating. You turn on the product and it starts figuring out your user susceptibility, and it differentiates frequency and the types of training and engagement that user is going to get, the type of payloads that they're exposed to. You essentially turn it on, and then what you consume out the back end is just the extent to which Microsoft's Defender for Office 365 product has reduced your risk.
So I mean, yeah. Of course, we get these at Microsoft as well. They're like the phishing emails where they want to test us. They're super sneaky. Like, you really have to click on the sender, because the sender looks like, I don't know, something at Microsoft.com, very, legit, unless you basically click on it and understand what the real email is. Even sometimes the email is still real, but then the link, like, super sophisticated. What options do you have if you create such a simulation or like a training? I don't like, is a simulation the same as a training, or I'm getting things confused here?
Our product uses only real world harvested payloads. So we don't write anything. We essentially let attackers write the payloads that they think are going to work against customers. And then we, our
crowdsourced.
MDO is looking at all the email. It's essentially crowdsourced with bad guys. Yeah. So as we figure out that this is a real phishing mail, or a user submits it, and we sort of assess that it's definitely real, we harvest those payloads, we de-weaponize them so that they don't have the bad guy stuff in it anymore, and we publish them to a library of hundreds of payloads in a bunch of different languages that are sort of baked into the product. But more importantly, our sense is that the global payloads that we harvest and publish for everybody are good for most generic cases. The best version of these simulations are ones where you harvest with automation from your own threat protection feed. You basically get the payloads that attackers are sending to you, to your users, harvest them, de-weaponize them, and use them in these simulations. Essentially, you want the most tricky payloads that you can get from the real world, and use that to train your users. We think of simulation and training as having 2 purposes. The first is teaching, right? You have to educate users about, this is what a phishing mail is going to look like, and that you'll click it, and then maybe it takes you to a credit harvesting page, or maybe it takes you to a page with a link that allows you to download something. There's like 7 different variants or so that we think of like we call them TTPs for techniques for phishing. You have to teach them about that. Part of that education is just exposing them to it. And so what we find is that today there's a big focus on the assessment stuff, the measuring the click-through rates, and you're trying to do both at the same time, and they sort of conflate with each other. So when you're trying to teach, you want everyone to have the experience, right? You want everyone to click, everyone to see what a phishing mail looks like, see what the TTPs are that contained inside of it. And then separately, you want to do assessment simulations where you're not necessarily trying to teach in that context. You're just trying to see who is going to be susceptible if a real world payload ends up coming through.
So, but this is then a click-through training, or is it a video, or how is the the education part work? Like, is there anything we can look at? Can you show me something?
100%. Yeah. When an end user actually receives the training assignment notification, this is all customizable, of course, but they'll see, the note saying, hey, you've been assigned training. This is the context for it. They'll see the actual email that they received, and they'll receive a nice link to actually go to the training site. So when they do that, they can see the training assignments page that shows them all the trainings that they've been assigned, which ones have been completed and which ones are overdue. You can see here I've done a lot of testing. I'm very overdue on my training. And what that training looks like when they click through is just like this. This is localized in whatever their language is. It meets full accessibility standards and so forth.
So you were saying organizations, they can create their own phishing email content repository?
Yes, the attack simulation training tool does have a sizable payload library that we provide for customers. You can find this in your content library under payloads. And there's basically a couple of hundred of what we call global payloads. All of our payloads are harvested from the real world. We don't write them, attackers write them, and then we harvest them and then basically de-weaponize them and publish them to all customers. A couple hundred, as I said, in a variety of different languages. You see here there's English and Portuguese and a bunch of other languages.
I got a bunch of those already. The American Express password reset is very familiar.
That's
the DHL package.
Yeah. Exactly. So, the MSIT tenant, the Microsoft IT group uses our tool to facilitate all of our corporate phishing exercises. These payloads are, like I said, available to everybody, and you can edit them. So if you find one that you sort of like, but you want to change a couple things about it, you can certainly do that. The other two types of payloads we provide are essentially tenant authored. You can create essentially a custom payload if you'd like. It's under tenant payloads, and you have the ability to create a new one from here. And this is essentially like blank canvas, whatever you want to write. And then we have a tenant payload that is harvested through automation. And the basic idea here is you can take attacker targeted payloads that are sent to your tenant and harvest them with automation to then de-weaponize them and put them in your library as a draft. And you can go and review them and basically convert them to a tenant payload. These are often very, very interesting. You can see all these are from the real world, like this BK testing for cred harvest. So this is something that a real attacker sent to this particular tenant, and we harvested, de-weaponized it, and made it available essentially as a real world payload. All of our payloads they're harvested in the language in which they were created, and we at the moment don't localize them into n number of different languages, at least in part because we feel like the attackers will differentiate their payloads based on geography. And so instead of using one payload localized into n number of different languages, our recommendation is to use payloads in the language that attackers use that target a particular geography. So if you've got US users and you've got users in France, use two different payloads that attackers have written to target those particular user bases, and you'll find you get better training experiences, better assessment experiences, and so forth. Now, all of our training experiences, like the actual coursework and things like that, are localized into 36 different languages. So the payloads is the only thing where you'll have to essentially construct the localization piece with a little bit of strategic harvesting.
So how would I create a simulation, something like what, like I think just to like, how does a template look like? What can I customize? And these kind of things.
Yeah, let me just walk you through how you create a simulation in the attack simulation training tool. We've obviously got our 5 tabs along the top. You go into simulations, and it shows you all the simulations that have been created in this particular tenant. You click launch a simulation, and the first question you're asked is essentially what kind of a technique do you want to assess or train your users on? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here. These all capture different techniques that attackers use. And there's pretty detailed explanation of exactly what's going on for each of these. Credit harvesting is the most common one that's used. It literally is how attackers will harvest credentials from your end users. So we'll do an assessment on that today. I'm going to give this a name, Ninja Training Demo, and I'm going to click Next. Now I'm presented with all of the payloads that are used in this particular type of attack. So these are all credit harvesting attacks. You can see here I have the option of many different kinds of languages. I'm going to pick Facebook account verification. I can preview this before I actually pick it. And I'm going to decide I'm going to do that. I'm going to click Next here. I now can select the type of users that I want to participate in here. I have the option for all users inside my organization. I'll note here that our product scales to whatever size your organization is. The largest Office 365 tenant, we can very easily target every user in that tenant with no problems. You can also be more targeted about who you're going to simulate. We have a couple of pre-calculated dimensions here, users that haven't been targeted recently, or repeat offenders, users with specific tags by city or country or department or title, so on and so forth. So I'm going to pick all users. Guests are excluded in this particular case. And I'm going to go to the next step here. Now I get to pick the type of training that is going to happen. Now there's a couple options here. The default experience here is that Microsoft figures out what the best training is for your particular users and then assigns that. You can also pick no training. So it's just a simulation where you're assessing whether or not end users are actually going to click through. Or you can redirect to a custom URL. So if you have training that's in a learning management system that you own, you can also redirect end users to that instead. So I'm going to use the Microsoft training experience here. I'm going to pick a due date for when that happens, and that can be 7, 15, or 30 days. You can also select the specific training courses that you want from our catalog to get used. So I'll pick that for the first one. I'm going to add the particular trainings that I want. It'll show me options here, and I can also see everything that's in the catalog. So I'm going to pick phishing and this guy, web phishing and spear phishing. I'm going to add all 3 of these here. Now I get the ability to differentiate the training assignment based on actions taken. So I can say everybody gets the phishing ones. The folks that clicked the payload but didn't give up their credential will get the web phishing one, and the users that were actually fully compromised, they'll get the compromised ones. You get a little duration thing here. You can preview these in a different part. And then you get the landing page. The landing page is once users sort of click through and type in their credentials or don't type in the credentials, they'll land on basically a just-in-time training page that highlights the message, teaches them everything they need to know about the indicators that they should have noticed about that. And this is customizable. You can create your own. You can use a custom URL again or use ours. And we have a variety of templates. And so this is like light mode or dark mode or kind of fun or somewhat formal and so forth. You can also add a corporate logo to that landing page so folks know that it's yours. I'm going to add payload indicators to this particular email, and I get the ability to see a preview of it. So right now, this is the landing page that the end users will see, and they'll be able to see essentially a coach mark that highlights for them, hey, this is sort of threatening language, or this is a request for sensitive information, or this is facebookonline.com isn't a real, website or whatever. And then we get end user notifications. So you have the option to say, don't email my users at all. You can do customized end user notifications, or you can do the default end user notifications. So I'm going to pick that. You can change the language here. If you have different locales that you're trying to target, you can create notifications and landing pages and stuff in those particular languages. So you can sort of customize that. By default, there's 3 emails. There is a training assignment, there is a training reminder, and then there is a positive reinforcement message. Positive reinforcement gets sent if a user correctly reports a message that's part of a phishing campaign. So you can do this during the campaign, but the training reminder, you're going to say you're just going to do that weekly. I'm going to click next here. You can launch this as soon as I'm done, but you can also schedule it to launch in the future. And you can enable region-aware time zone delivery for this. So if you want something to land at a user's inbox at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, you can set region-aware time zone delivery, and it'll vary the delivery based on where that user is actually located. So I'm going to do this immediately. I'm not going to do region-aware. And away you go. I'll also highlight here that you have the ability to send a test to yourself, so you can just make double dog sure that the email that you're about to send out to hundreds of thousands of users or whatever is what you want it to be, and that there's no mistakes or issues in it. So it's just like a little safety net that you can do. All right, then you submit it. It gets processed by our orchestration framework, and will be scheduled to launch here in just a few minutes, and we'll proceed.
I have a question on, okay, now people receive that. What is being measured or collected? Like, I can ignore that email and delete it. I can click on the link or whatever. Like, there's different things people can now do with that email. Like, is that all captured?
It is, yes. Let me show you. So for any given simulation, I'll drill into the Ninja Show demo 2 here. You'll see over here all user activity. We record whether that was successfully delivered, reported, whether they clicked the email, credentials supplied, and so forth. There is a status activity down here of the types of notifications that were configured for this particular campaign. And there's a detail report here, essentially on a per user basis, to sort of highlight this user was compromised, yes or no. The last simulation activity was successfully delivered, and so forth. And this is exportable. So you can imagine a list of many thousands, and then you can sort of export this list and import it into other ecosystems. There's an API, of course, that sits behind all of this. It can be ingested into data warehousing and stuff like that. In addition to the simulation detail, the platform also supports a variety of program-level reporting metrics. So a bunch of them are linked here from the home page. And I'll sort of just walk through each of these. There's a training completion report, and this highlights which users have completed which training and what their course grades were. And you can see a list of all the trainings that particular user has completed. You can see a user coverage report here, and this is essentially a list of all the users that have experienced a simulation in some particular time period, what their result was, whether they were clicked or compromised, and so forth. There's a repeat offenders report, and this essentially captures folks that have clicked a simulation more than once of a bunch of different types. These are all, of course, all exportable and searchable, and you can change the column listings. And the last one, and this is the one I think is the most important, is the training efficacy report. So this shows all of the simulations that have been performed over this particular time period, and then it shows you what the compromise rate was for each of those.
So we want that one line to go up and the other one to go down.
Exactly. You want reports to go up and you want clicks to go down. One of the things that we learned very early on is that the click-through rate, just the flat click-through rate for any given simulation, is very dependent upon the specific payload being used. And so as a platform ecosystem, one of the things that we wanted to do was make it so where it mattered less which payload you used. We want them to be like attackers. They see it as very like throw away, use a payload once. Oh, it didn't work. Okay, let me just, gin up a new one really quick or whatever. They don't really care about, it just has to be more than one person that actually gets compromised in there. And so what we've done is for all of our global payloads, we've included a piece of metadata called a predicted compromise rate. You can see there's a column here. What that is for any harvested payload, we figured out how many people it actually compromised in the real world. And we sort of take that information and bring it back and say, if you were to use this in a simulation, we think the predicted compromise rate would be this, right? It would be 20% or 28% or 32% or whatever. So instead of just looking at flat click-through rates, what we want you to do is look at the delta between the predicted compromise rate and the actual compromise rate. And so that way it normalizes. You can compare any given payload versus another because you're not looking at the flat click-through rate, you're looking at the difference between predicted and actual. And our guess is that if you use payloads that have higher predicted compromise rates, it's more surprising and more engaging for those end users. It makes the training more impactful for them when they're surprised by it, when they're like, I didn't even realize that was a phishing email and so forth. And so we think you have better outcomes when you use payloads that have higher click-through rates.
Wow, Brendan, so this was a lot to cover in a single Ninja episode. Again, I told you I'm super new to this, so there was a lot. If people want to learn more, want to go a little bit into some other details of attack simulation training, are there any resources you can recommend people go watch or learn, read?
Yeah, totally. So the best way to learn about the product is obviously to, buy it and then go play with it. But there's a bunch of information on docs.microsoft.com. All the Microsoft Defender for Office 365 stuff. We're part of that, and so you'll find us there. There's also a Microsoft Tech blog that has Defender for O365, and we've got a special tag in there for all of our content. We put not just like feature releases when they come out, we put blogs out about that, but we also have a bunch of like general program guidance about how you set it up and how you communicate with your leadership about why you should do this and so forth. So lots of information out there.
And people can also start a trial, I would assume.
Yes, absolutely. So we're part of Microsoft Defender for Office 365's trialing ecosystem. So set up a trial for that, and we're in there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really learned a lot. I would have had way more questions, but we keep these episodes not too long from a duration. So sorry if you couldn't really cover everything you wanted, but thank you so much for being my expert on today's show, Brandon.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having us. It was a real delight.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for watching. Make sure you go to aka.ms/ninja show to check what other episodes are coming up, or even watch the ones that you missed from our previous sessions. And there is also a button, share your voice, and you can give us feedback. You can suggest sessions, content that you would like to hear from us, or just tell us how awesome we are. And with that, again, thank you so much for attending, and see you soon.